As Maryland continues to see young people accused in crimes, some law enforcement leaders are speaking out, frustrated with the juvenile justice system.
I'm sorry to say this, but I think we're all a part of Vincent Schiraldi's strange, weird social project.
The governor downplaying the issue.
I'm really proud of what the data is continuing to show us, and I don't get involved in the partisan talking points.
I'm going in depth on the issue, sitting down with law enforcement leaders and lawmakers, pressing them to find out what's being done to address the problem. Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of Fox 45 News In Depth. I'm Mikenzie Frost. As lawmakers in Annapolis focus in on solving the budget deficit, juvenile crime continues to plague communities throughout the state. In the 2 months since the legislative session began, we have seen a number of juvenile victims and suspects. Just 2 weeks into session, the 2 teens were arrested in connection to the stabbing of a 17-year-old inside a bathroom at Meade High School in Anne Arundel County. The suspects, an 18 and 14-year-old, are being charged with attempted murder. In February, 2 teenagers were shot and killed outside the mall in Columbia. 18-year-old Emerson Zaya is charged with the murders. Zaya was on an ankle monitor at the time of the shooting in connection with an attempted murder charge, which police say took place 1 day before Zaya turned 18. While the ankle monitor did not come from the Department of Juvenile Services, Fox 45 News learned Zaya does have a juvenile record. And just this month, 16-year-old was shot and killed outside Lansdowne High School. Police have not identified a suspect in that case, but the suspect was, quote, according to police, very young. Along with those violent crimes, there have been a number of smaller crimes police say juveniles are responsible for, many of them caught on camera. They include carjackings, robberies, and assaults. The ongoing juvenile crime has residents, lawmakers, and law enforcement leaders frustrated with the Department of Juvenile Services and its Secretary, Vincent Schiraldi. Carroll County Sheriff Jim DeWees called out the Secretary when he announced the arrest of a young offender he says DJS allowed to slip through the cracks. 19-year-old Darius Bond was arrested in connection with a deadly hit-and-run last August. Police say he was already in custody for an unrelated crime in Frederick County and was recently released from a Baltimore City jail on gun possession charges. The sheriff with harsh criticism for DJS.
The state's just got to get better at what they're doing and stop coddling people and really recognize the issue and talk to the experts about it. The numbers that Mr. Schiraldi gives are, it's voodoo. He's just making stuff up. It's a shame. But he's just simply doing a poor job, and the governor needs to change leadership there.
I sat down with the sheriff to talk more about his frustration with the state of juvenile crime in Maryland and the DJS secretary.
I'm not saying anything that everyone else in the business isn't saying or thinking.
Carroll County Sheriff Jim DeWees says juvenile crime is impacting people far and wide in Maryland. And when the problem touched his county, he was ready to step up and speak out.
I made a prepared statement to let the governor and anyone know that, including the Secretary of DJS and judges or anybody that had contact with this individual that was here in my county, struck and killed a citizen in my county. I made a point to let them know that they were indirectly responsible for the death of this individual by the decisions that they've made. So it was nothing organically. I had planned to call them out.
In this case, DeWees says the suspect no stranger to law enforcement. Though the details of his involvement with the Department of Juvenile Services are not known to the public due to state privacy laws.
This individual, Darius Bond, didn't show up at the age of 18 and 6 months and just start his involvement with organized crimes and stealing cars and handguns and burglaries, and not only in Baltimore, but Carroll County, Frederick County, and other jurisdictions. That didn't just happen. I know it didn't because I know his criminal history. He has an extensive history with DJS. He's been involved with them for quite some time, and nothing was done. And if it was done, it wasn't done right.
DJS Secretary Vincent Schiraldi has been in the spotlight since Governor Wes Moore named him 2 years ago. This legislative session, lawmakers grilled him about an oversight report showing the department lacks oversight and controls to track performance metrics for programs it sends kids to for services.
Good afternoon. This is the House Judiciary Committee.
During one of those General Assembly hearings, Schiraldi told lawmakers,
a whole bunch of our kids are one and done. Somewhere around 70 to 75%.
DeWees says he's not buying it. Do you believe that's accurate?
Not at all. Not at all. You know, the secretary also say that juvenile crime is down, and those are just numbers. I guess the equivalent would be as if I changed the speed limit on the interstate to 100 miles per hour and said that speeding was down. I think he plays with numbers, and I'm sorry to say this, but I think we're all a part of Vincent Schiraldi's strange, weird social project. It's not working.
After the sheriff's news conference taking direct aim at Schiraldi, lawmakers, and the governor,
you are all indirectly responsible for Mr. Crowell's death.
We took Sheriff DeWees' criticisms to Governor Moore himself. How do you respond to that and the calls for Secretary Schiraldi's resignation, given the concerns that still remain about the functionality and accountability coming from DJS?
Listen, I'd say it's a partisan talking point because what I pay attention to is data. What I pay attention to is numbers. And if you look at every single category for both juvenile non-fatal shootings, juvenile crime, et cetera, each and every one of them are down. I'm really proud of the results. I'm really proud of what the data is continuing to show us, and I don't get involved in the partisan talking point.
DJS doesn't have the accountability measurements for some of the performance outcomes for the programs that it's sending these juveniles to, though. So how can you be confident that DJS is actually providing the level of services necessary?
Well, I can tell you that there has been a very real increase in the way you do accountability within DJS.
DeWees says he's not the one playing politics.
And I think that the governor should give a straight answer, which I really rarely ever see out of the governor, is giving a straight answer for a question. And I think the only person that's politically posturing is the governor. I want to be the sheriff of this county. We don't want to do anything other than law enforcement in our county. We have no aspirations of going anywhere else. The governor does.
The frustration with leadership and direction of DJS is not felt by DeWees alone, he says.
I am the president of the Maryland Sheriff's Association. I do represent all the sheriffs throughout the state. Some of them may not be able to get on camera and tell you what I'm telling you, but I'm telling you that they are absolutely infuriated at what they see. You know, his policies are reckless.
I know that the Sheriff's Association has sent a letter to the governor asking about that. Republican lawmakers have also sent a letter asking for Schiraldi to be replaced. The governor maintains, at least right now by his actions, he has not replaced the secretary. Do you believe that at some point that will change?
I would have thought that it would have changed by now. I've been 36 years doing this. I couldn't tell you the name of a previous DJS secretary, but unfortunately I know Vincent Schiraldi's name, not for anything really all that good. It's a shame.
If leadership change doesn't happen at DJS, which at this point it's unclear if or when that would happen, what's at stake for public safety in Carroll County and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, people's lives. Simply put, Terry Crowell was a hard-working blue-collar guy that lived up in Taneytown, worked up in Pennsylvania, got on his motorcycle to go to work and never came home. That man's life meant an awful lot to people, and that's what's at stake. Your life is.
We reached out to DJS Secretary Vincent Schiraldi for a response to DeWees' comments and the latest juvenile crime data. We did not hear back. Sheriff DeWees isn't the only one raising concerns about Secretary Schiraldi. Even as Governor Moore continues to defend the secretary, lawmakers in Annapolis are skeptical. So far this year, Schiraldi has appeared in front of both the Senate Judiciary Committee and the House Judiciary Committee. Those hearings were sparked by a December report looking into DJS's oversight and policies. Senators grilled Schiraldi about how his department tracks reoffenses.
There's a change in the types of arrests and those that can be arrested. It may be going up, but it's still lower than where we were before.
Remember, this is only non-violent felonies. That's all it changed. Who are under the age of 13 was pretty small.
My point being is that it's not giving a complete accurate picture.
There's no crime statistic that gives the complete picture. Arrests don't give it, referrals don't give it, self-reported crime doesn't give it. Everything's a snapshot.
What I was appalled about was that the same individuals went into the system and then came back out, and then went in again and came back out, and went in again and came back out. I presume that along the way there were services being provided in some of these cases to some of these individuals. Obviously, they didn't succeed because the individual, at the end of the day, came back into the system again.
Schiraldi says DJS has made policy changes in the months since this Senate hearing. He says DJS no longer closes cases when families don't show up to court, an issue he claims he didn't know about until the December report. How is it possible that you didn't know that that was happening in your own agency?
What's happening here is that these are the young people who are the least risky kids being brought into our system. Generally, first offense misdemeanor cases that are very sort of low level and they're low risk kids. So I paid most of my attention during the first 2 years on tackling the most serious and risky kids at risk of gun violence, and we've moved the dial on that in a way that I think is very important, and that's the public safety area I chose to focus on. And as time goes on, I picked new areas to focus on, and this will now be an important thing to pay attention to.
In February, House lawmakers pressed Schiraldi about the report revealing 70% of juveniles with cases resolved at intake have no record of being sent to services. Schiraldi pushed back against the concerns that DJS is not doing anything for those kids.
It is wrong that we cannot quantify that the way we should be able to. That is, I absolutely agree with the OPEGA report on that, but that does not mean that those kids aren't getting services.
Several juvenile justice bills are currently making their way through the State House. One of those bills would end automatic charging of young offenders as adults, instead starting 75% of those cases in juvenile court. Other proposals focus on reportable offenses and the law surrounding how certain juvenile offenses are reported to school districts. One bill, sponsored by Republican Delegate Robin Grammer and other members of the Maryland Freedom Caucus, would require DJS to notify school officials if a student is arrested for a reportable offense and provide those students with educational services. Delegate Grammer joins us now to talk about his bill and the changes Republicans want to see to Maryland's juvenile justice system. Thank you for joining us at this point, Delegate.
Thanks for having me.
So talk to me a little bit about the bill that you are pushing when it comes to reportable offenses. What would this change to current law?
So I served on the Juvenile Fatality Committee, and we got to take a look behind the curtain of the juvenile system. And what you find is the school system is very frankly very angry at the juvenile services system. And a big part of the reason behind that is frequently the juvenile services system sends students into the school system who have massive infractions. In Howard County, if you remember, the student was sent to the school system and he had been put, I believe, on an ankle monitor for beating a man and paralyzing him. And the superintendent of Howard County said, we wouldn't have made that placement if I had known his background. And that student went on to, allegedly murder another person. So the issue of school systems having no idea of the history of students that are placed in their prerogative is really a big one. So my bill, House Bill 588, a bill that's pushed by the Maryland Freedom Caucus, it's a really simple bill that was supported by a wide coalition, and the only people to oppose the bill were Governor Moore's Department of Juvenile Services and Secretary Schiraldi. So we think it's a very reasonable thing. We think when you have a bill that's supported by some of the most conservative jurisdictions and also some very liberal jurisdictions like Howard County, we think it's a very reasonable public safety measure for all our counties.
Do you have hope that it will move forward? Crossover Day is coming up. What's the plan for that bill?
Well, it's crossover crazy week. You know, we have some time. We've been told that we'll be here double sessions Friday, double sessions Saturday, and all day Monday. So there's still time. I think, this bill has a chance. Really, we're in the final stages of lobbying for good ideas we can get through the House here.
There's been a lot of criticism of DJS Secretary Schiraldi. We heard some of the criticism from Carroll County Sheriff Jim DeWees. He says that Carroll County Sheriff says that the secretary is a public safety threat. When I took those concerns to the governor, he said that that was just partisan talking points. How do you respond to that?
You know, I think the great thing about crime and public safety is you can get away from the statistics and talk about how things work. Let me give you an example that's current. The recent beating that happened in Essex to the young boy, he was attacked by at least 8 other people. They pulled down his pants, they pushed him down, they kicked him and punched him in the face. He was beat by at least 8 other youth, and only so many of those could even be charged. So I think that the fact right there that you can have a gang beating and still not charge those people, it really shows what we have. And you don't need to get into statistics, but the leadership we're seeing from Governor Moore and Secretary Schiraldi really is frankly quite extreme. And we could fix these problems, we could fix these loopholes, but not if their leadership is failing and they fight us tooth and nail at every positive change we're trying to make here in the legislature. So I think we should look at the cases before us. I think we should make legislative changes to fix those issues and not have such extreme leadership as we're seeing by Schiraldi and Moore.
All right, Delegate Grammer, we'll keep our eyes on those bills as they make their way through the session. I appreciate your time.
Thanks so much.
Still to come, juvenile crime concerns are only growing as summer approaches. A law enforcement expert joins us to talk about how school attendance could impact crime rates. As the weather warms up, crime usually ticks up in Baltimore. For the past few years, summer has kicked off with violence in the city. Back in 2022, a 15-year-old from Howard County was arrested for allegedly shooting 3 teens at the Inner Harbor over Memorial Day weekend. A 17-year-old boy was killed in that shooting and 2 others were injured. In 2023, 2 teens were shot after hundreds of juveniles gathered at the Inner Harbor on Easter Sunday. That shooting came just 1 week after another large crowd of juveniles in the same area. It led to Mayor Brandon Scott to bring back Baltimore City's youth curfew during Memorial Day weekend 2023, a city law that isn't enforced every year.
We get these young people to come inside, to not be out there doing things that we know are putting them at risk, getting into safe spaces at recreation centers, finding out what resources they need for them and their families.
The mayor also enforced his summer youth engagement strategy, including a curfew from Memorial Day to Labor Day in 2024. Even before school lets out for summer, some law enforcement experts say attendance rates could impact crime. Carroll County Sheriff Jim DeWees argues truancy can lead to crime because without school, students don't have a safe place to go.
I think if you go to other jurisdictions, the truancy rate is much higher than that, where there's maybe 50–60% of the students that are in school that should be in school. And if you've got kids that are walking around without a proper place for them to go, a school for them to go that's clean, healthy, and safe, and they're walking around the streets of wherever they live at, inevitably they're going to be involved in some sort of criminal activity or mischief.
We're taking a look at how students were considered habitually truant in school systems in our region and comparing data to crime statistics in the jurisdictions. Being habitually truant means a student has unlawfully missed 20% of the days where they were enrolled in school. In a typical case, that would be 36 days out of the 180-day school year. In Baltimore City, 21% of students were habitually truant during the 2023-2024 school year. During the same school year, Baltimore City saw more than 450 total homicides and more than 1,000 robberies, including carjackings. In Baltimore County, less than 6% were habitual truants during the same time period. In 2023 and 2024, Baltimore County saw 58 total homicides and more than 1,600 robberies. By comparison, Howard County's truancy rate was around 2% during the 2023-24 school year. During those 2 years, Howard County saw 11 homicide cases and around 300 robberies. Joining me now is the National Police spokesperson, Betsy Smith. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me this evening.
I appreciate your time. I want to talk to you a little bit about the truancy rate and the connection to crime rates. Do you believe that there is a correlation there?
Absolutely. I was a juvenile detective for years. Busy kids don't have time to commit crime. So when you have kids that are in school or in the summer, like the mayor talked about, if they're in some sort of program where they're busy, then they are less likely to be out on the streets committing crime.
Do you think that there should be a closer connection or working relationship with jurisdictions that are seeing more students who are truant to try and get them to get back into school? What can they do to keep them in the classroom so they don't have time to go out and potentially commit crimes?
Well, one of the things that nobody talked about in that package you just played was parents. You know, this ultimately falls on the parents, the grandparents, the guardians of these children. So we've got to have parental involvement as well as government involvement. I like what the mayor did with the curfew last year. However, we've got to make sure if we're going to install a curfew that it's met with punishment when it's not followed. And that's one of the problems that you have in not just Baltimore and the surrounding area, but in the entire state of Maryland. Are kids who break the law being appropriately punished?
The swift and certain consequences, that phrase we often hear from law enforcement saying is a pivotal part in ensuring that there is accountability for young offenders. As we look toward the summer without school, what can jurisdictions, elected leaders, communities do to ensure that these kids aren't going out there and committing crimes if they don't have school or classrooms to be in?
Well, what they can do is make sure that they have programs, whether it's job programs or volunteer programs for those kids, and kids who are either too young to work or if there's not jobs available. Adults in the community, including police officers, need to make time to volunteer for programs like Big Brothers Big Sisters or Through Your Church or whatever. And people, everyone in the community who's worried about being a crime victim needs to make sure that they are prepared, but they also need to make sure that they volunteer for those programs. I can't stress enough that busy kids are less likely to commit low-level crime.
In the past, we've seen curfews implemented after something happens. As we get closer to summer, should elected leaders look at the idea of implementing a curfew before a tragic event?
Absolutely. Elected leaders need to look at their communities, neighborhood by neighborhood, and try and determine, would a curfew help the situation? And people, voters need to put pressure on their legislators, statewide as well as local, to put measures in place to protect the community from juvenile criminals. We've got to make sure that we're paying attention not just to the potential juvenile offenders, but to the potential crime victims as well.
All right, Betsy Smith, I appreciate your time and your insight. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
This week, we asked what consequences you want to see for juvenile offenders. We'll take a look at some of your responses when we come back.
Here's tonight's primetime lineup on Fox 45. Brought to you locally by your McDonald's owner-operators.
This week, we asked you what consequences do you want to see for juvenile offenders. We had a lot of responses. Let's take a look at just a few of them. Karen says jail time and cleaning up graffiti and trash. Megan says rehabilitation over punitive action. Community service, education, counseling, mandatory mentorship. Shannon says jail and start going after parents as well. That's it for this week's edition of Fox 45 News In Depth. I'm Mikenzie Frost.